before the bar of justice. Now I'd like to go into the details of the allegations a little more. In addition to serving in the House of Representatives, Congressman Collins was also on the board of directors of Innate Immunotherapeutics, a publicly traded company that was developing a drug for multiple sclerosis. In June of 2017, Congressman Collins was told some confidential and highly sensitive information about Innate, information that was not yet made public, namely that Innate's main drug, the drug Innate was developing to be the backbone of its company, was a total failure. This was devastating information for the company. Congressman Collins had an obligation, a legal duty, to keep that information secret until that information was released by the company to the public. But he didn't keep it secret. Instead, as alleged, he decided to commit a crime. He placed his family and friends above the public good. Congressman Collins was a major investor in Innate, and so was his son Cameron. The congressman knew he couldn't sell his own shares for personal and technical reasons, including that he was already under an investigation regarding Innate by the Congressional Ethics Office. The crime that he committed was to tip his son Cameron so that Cameron and a few select others could trade on the news while the investing public remained in the dark. As the indictment alleges, that's exactly what they did. His son Cameron sold. Cameron's fiancée sold. The father of the fiancée, Zarsky, sold. Mr. Zarsky's wife sold. Other friends and relatives sold. And all because Congressman Collins violated his duty to keep Innate's information secret. And when the news of the drug's failure became public, the stock plummeted. In total, the conspirators used the inside information to avoid over $750,000 in losses. But Congressman Collins couldn't keep his crime a secret forever. The FBI asked to interview him, and instead of telling the truth, he lied. And so did Cameron Collins, and so did Stephen Zarsky. By lying to the FBI, they compounded their insider trading crime with the crime of criminal cover-up. Now I'd like to go over to these two charts which summarize some of the allegations in the indictment. This first chart is a tipping chain. It demonstrates the flow of the illegal insider information and the trading, the illegal trading of that information. At the top of the chain is Congressman Collins. He had an obligation as a Innate board member when he received confidential corporate information to keep that information secret until the company announced it to the public. In total disregard of that obligation, minutes after Congressman Collins received the devastating, highly confidential news that Innate's drug had failed its drug trial, Congressman Collins tipped that inside information to his son so that his son could trade. Cameron Collins, when he received that illegal inside information, he did two things, both of which are illegal. He sold stock based on that inside information and avoided $570,000 in losses. And he also took that illegal inside information and tipped others. He tipped his fiancée. He tipped his fiancée's wife. He tipped his fiancée's father, and he tipped a friend, all of whom traded on that illegal inside information. Steven Zarski, his fiance's father, avoided $143,000 in losses by trading on that information, and he tipped others. He tipped his brother, he tipped his sister, and he tipped a friend, two of whom traded on the information. One attempted to trade on the information, but was unable. In total, the conspirators avoided losses of over $768,000, all because of the initial illegal insider trading tip by Congressman Collins. In this chart, we set some of the key allegations in the indictment against a timeline, a backdrop of the innate share price. On the evening of June 22nd, 2017, Congressman Collins was at a congressional picnic, and at 6:55 he received an email from the CEO of Innate informing him of the horrendous news that the drug had failed its trial. At 7:10 p.m., Congressman Collins responded to that email. So as the indictment alleges, at least at 7:10 p.m., Congressman Collins was aware of the inside information. A minute later, Congressman Collins attempts to call his son. In a period of 5 minutes, there are 6 unsuccessful calls. On the 7th call, at 7:16 p.m., as alleged in the indictment, Congressman Collins illegally tips his son Cameron about the drug trial results so that his son Cameron could trade on those results. Later that evening, on June 22nd, after Cameron Collins has the illegal insider trading information, Cameron Collins drives with his fiancée to his fiancée's parents' house. They arrive at the house at 9:17 p.m. Less than 20 minutes later, at 9:34 p.m., the fiancée's mother is on the phone with her broker, beginning the process of selling her shares of Innate. The next morning, on June 23rd, at 7:42 a.m., Cameron Collins begins the process of selling his shares of Innate. During June 23rd and June 26th, Cameron Collins sells approximately 1.39 million shares of Innate prior to the market close of June 26. After the market closes, Innate announces to the public that its drug had failed the trial. And the next day, the drug price, the price of Innate, falls off a cliff. It drops 92% in value in a single day. This was the drop that was anticipated by the co-conspirators. This was the drop in value that the co-conspirators avoided by selling their shares before the public announcement, and they could only sell those shares by virtue of the initial tip of inside information by Congressman Collins. A case of this type and significance obviously involves the SEC and the FBI, and their representatives are standing up here with me today. To my left is my good friend Bill Sweeney, the Assistant Director in charge of the FBI's New York field office, and to the far left is John Brosnan, the Special Agent in charge of the FBI New York office Criminal Division. The FBI's work on this case was spectacular, and I want to thank them for their professionalism and dedication. We work with the FBI on so many important cases, and it is always a privilege. To the left of Bill is Stephanie Avakian and Steve Pekin, who are co-directors of the SEC's Division of Enforcement. I want to thank them and the SEC for their hard work on this matter. Last, I want to acknowledge and thank the career prosecutors in my office handling the case. To my right is Max Nicholas, Damian Williams, Bob Allen, Scott Hartman, and the co-chiefs of our Securities and Commodities Fraud Task Force, Tim Kasoulas and Jason Cowley. Congressman Collins, who, by virtue of his office, helps to write the laws of our nation, acted as if the law didn't apply to him. The charges today demonstrate once again that no matter what the crime and no matter who committed it, we stand committed in the pursuit of justice without fear or favor. I would now like to invite to the podium Bill Sweeney.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. U.S. Representative Christopher Collins sat on N8's board of directors for a period of more than 3 years, spanning the run-up to the drug trial announcement in mid-2017. Collins himself was the company's largest shareholder. In or about the summer of 2017, a drug designed to treat a debilitating form of multiple sclerosis had entered the late stages of a Phase 2b clinical trial. This drug, MIS 416, was the only viable drug in the pipeline for N8. This is significant in that the company's value was nearly completely wrapped up in the success of the clinical trial and a subsequent Phase 3 trial. On the evening of June 22, 2017, Collins received an email informing him that MIS 416 had failed its clinical trial. Electronic records indicate his initial shock at having received the news. The drug, once anticipated to hold billions of dollars in value, would now be the cause of significant financial loss for N8 and, of course, its investors, many of whom shared a personal relationship with Congressman Collins. While the congressman was legally bound to keep his information confidential until the trial results were released to the investing public 4 days later on June 26, we allege he did not. The indictment charges that Collins immediately began contacting the family and friends he had brought into the fold. This set off a ripple effect in which many investors, directly or indirectly connected to Congressman Collins, were notified. Most of them quickly sold their shares. N8 stock price plummeted 92% on the first trading day following the public announcement. But Collins' conspirators had saved themselves over $750,000 in losses. Collins himself, having been prohibited from selling his shares for various reasons, did not avoid a financial loss. Despite this fact, his alleged actions brought him face-to-face with federal agents who had become aware of the crime that had been committed. When questioned by law enforcement about the alleged dealings, Congressman Collins, his son Cameron, Cameron's fiance's father, Stephen Zarsky, lied plain and simple. Today, they are charged with insider trading and lying to federal law enforcement agents. While Collins may have thought that giving his family and friends a heads up about material, non-public information would benefit them in the long run, here's a better inside tip for those who think they can play by a different set of rules. Access to this kind of information carries with it significant responsibility, especially for those in society who hold a position of trust. Act honorably and in accordance with the law, and do not lie to special agents of the FBI. Many thanks always to our partners, especially Jeff and your team of career prosecutors. Gentlemen, your work has been exceptional. To the SEC, I'd personally like to thank Stephanie and Steve for your work. Your team has also been outstanding. To John and John Cassell, who lead our white-collar branch, and to your team of special agents and investigators, I want to extend my personal appreciation. Some are standing in the back in the shadows, but to Nick, John, Yelena, and Tracy, your work has been exceptional. What you do in the community matters and makes a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. like to invite to the podium Stephanie Avakian, Co-Director of Enforcement at the SEC.
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon. As Jeff said, my name is Stephanie Avakian, and I'm co-director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement. And before I begin my remarks, I'd like to also thank U.S. Attorney Jeff Berman and his prosecutors, as well as the FBI, who worked on this matter, for their assistance. Today, the SEC filed securities fraud charges against Congressman Christopher Collins, his son Cameron Collins, and 3 others, alleging that they engaged in insider trading ahead of Innate Immunotherapeutics' announcement of negative drug trial results in June 2017. The SEC's complaints allege that Christopher Collins learned of the negative news in his capacity as a member of Innate's board of directors and quickly tipped Cameron Collins, who held a large position.
You're watching the enforcement officer from the SEC following the FBI deputy director, and also for that region, and also Jeff Berman, the U.S. attorney, who replaced Preet Bharara, I believe, as a Trump nominee. This is totally separate from the Mueller investigations, as Chuck Todd was just saying. I want to bring in Casey Hunt, because Casey, Congressman Collins is on the ballot, and according to New York state law, there is no way for him not to be reelected.
Right.
If the voters choose to reelect him, Donald Trump won that district by 59% of the vote. Chris Collins was the first member of Congress, completely the first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump, the candidate, before even Jeff Sessions did from the Senate, and his most loyal supporter and his congressional liaison during the transition.
At a time when there was literally no one in the Republican Party who was holding elective office at the federal level who would stand next to President Trump. Chris Collins is the guy who did. He took that leap, and we know how the Trump family views loyalty like this. But you're right, he's likely to be reelected. There's no real way to strip him off the ballot without Collins' consent in doing so. And let's not forget, there's history of members of Congress continuing to serve even when they're under a cloud of indictment. It's
Democrats as well as Republicans. And that's why, interestingly, the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, put out a statement sharply criticizing him and talking about the corruption. But no one in Congress and leadership is calling for him to step down pending a conviction. And Chuck, join us here, because Senator Menendez stayed through a very contentious trial and was acquitted and is still, the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Casey's right in this respect. If you look at the history of members of Congress who have been under investigation, and you talk to the ones that agreed to leadership demands that they resign, and those that didn't, the ones that resign always regret it. They always look back and think, oh, I could have beaten it, or maybe I could have survived. I'll tell you this, though. In this environment, the amount of attention this is going to get, look, this is a solid Republican district, but his Democratic opponent is a local elected official. He's a township supervisor, not in Buffalo, but in and around that area. He's not unviable, is my point here.
Exactly.
And so I wouldn't totally write it off. But I do think the calculation is this, Andrea, and if I were Steve Stivers, by the way, talk about, like I said, the guy's already had a rough week, rough night in Ohio. Then you wake up to this. Now, like I said, I brought up, there's a whole Virginia Beach problem, too, with an incumbent member down there, Scott Taylor, a local special prosecutor investigating petition signature fraud, right? So you had all these little headaches. But if you're Stivers, you know what you say to yourself? You go, you know what? Rather than trying to figure out how to get a new candidate on the ballot, you probably got a 55% chance that Collins can eke this out. Although I would remind you, remember Dan Rostenkowski back in the day, Andrea? He was under investigation, and people thought, yeah, well, not that district. Yeah, guess what? That district, too, went down in '94. It can happen. But if you're the Republicans here, the best thing to do, just politically, would be see if Collins survives, and then if he does, force him out, and maybe you can win a special in the spring of 19 or something.
And let me just also point out, because some people may have as well a long memory, this issue of this stock came up with another sitting member of Congress, who was Tom Price. He was being nominated to be HHS secretary. Now, he ended up stepping down after all sorts of allegations about improper use of expensive charter flights, and it never was this issue. But he was questioned about his stock sales here and whether or not he had gotten some tips from his friend and colleague, Chris Collins. So nothing was ever alleged, nothing is being alleged, and he has not been charged in this, so there's no evidence against him. But this was an issue in that confirmation as well. There's a whole drain the swamp issue here that has not been fully addressed. Kristen Welker is standing by as well at the White House. Kristen, the White House keeps, buffeting away any allegations about insider this and insider that and corruption. But this is the first person to endorse the candidate, Donald Trump.
It's going to be very difficult, Andrea, for President Trump to distance himself from Chris Collins for that very reason. This is the first person to endorse President Trump, someone who is sort of an unofficial liaison to the transition team. And so President Trump is going to have to come out and say something. Now, I can tell you, I've reached out to a whole host of White House officials. I asked Mercy Schlapp, she's the strategic communications director, effectively, look, what is your reaction to this breaking news? She said, I refer you to DOJ. So she didn't have any immediate response to that. Right now, they're sort of trying to brush aside questions. Of course, we continue to look at our Twitter feed to get the president's reaction to all of this. How has he typically responded? He digs in. You raised the issue of Tom Price. Tom Price was under scrutiny, under criticism for months before ultimately he left this administration. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a similar approach. But of course, the stakes are different because we are getting closer to the midterms. Of course, you had all of those warning signs overnight, and the president himself right now weighing whether to do an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller. We know that his team of lawyers is poised to submit a counter proposal to Mueller's team's latest proposal. So there's a lot that's hanging over this president as he tries to determine how to respond to this latest controversy, Andrea.
And count me as skeptical about any real negotiations going on until we hear about it from the Mueller team, because we've heard so many over months and months and weeks and weeks now from Rudy Giuliani.
Since January, yes.
Right. And we only have it from one side and from one part of one side, which is not from the president himself. So they're making it look as though the president really does want to cooperate and have an interview, but who knows? I'm totally unconvinced about that. So let me also bring in Daniel Goldman, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, now an NBC News legal analyst, happily. And Daniel, you know very well these kinds of cases. You've prosecuted some of these very cases in that district.
Yes, I prosecuted an insider trading case against the Las Vegas gambler Billy Walters last year, and that case was better known because Phil Mickelson was wrapped up in it, though not charged. And this is a powerful indictment. And what you're seeing here related to Chris Collins is that he is the insider. He is the guy who had the information that was supposed to be kept confidential. He was on the board of directors of this company. And as soon as he gets the information that is going to tank the stock, which ultimately went down 92% when the information was made public, he relayed it to his son, who then relayed it to a whole host of other people, all of whom were owners in this stock and all of whom sold their shares of stock, or at least attempted to sell their shares of stock. So there's no Rick Gates type of cooperating witness here. It still remains to be seen who the witnesses are, what kind of evidence they have. It's hard. I've been trying to study the indictment and figure out a little bit. I think some of the people who are mentioned as CCs, co-conspirators, likely are cooperating with the government and will testify, which could add a whole nother wrinkle because they seem to be all family members. But this is in insider trading cases, what you look for, and I'll draw the analogy to the Manafort case just because it's going on and we've been talking a lot about it and people have been talking about how it's a document case. In insider trading cases, the critical documents are the records of phone calls and the records of trades. And what you see in this indictment is incredibly closely timed calls and trades related to information. I mean, it alleges basically that Representative Collins got an email at 6:55 p.m. that informed him of the inside information, and by 7:10 p.m. he's trying to reach his son, who then immediately tries to make a trade. That is documentary evidence that is very powerful.
And in fact, Daniel, what they're now saying there is that 6 times, he called his son 6 times in 5 minutes from the south lawn of the White House, from the congressional picnic.
Yes.
So that is incredibly detailed. They obviously have the phone records and they've got the trading records. So one
He
doesn't know
pulled
what
himself
cooperating
away
witnesses
from his
they would need.
picnic to do
Right.
this.
And, you know, calling from the White House grounds, that sort of adds a very colorful, shall we say, political note to all of this that can be very persuasive, one would think, to a jury. If it ever gets to a jury, we don't know how long. Now, the other question I would have is, you have such familiarity with this, Daniel. How long would it take with pretrial motions and all the rest? When would this come to trial? Before November?
Absolutely not. No way it will go to trial before November. I would expect, I don't know who the judge is. A lot of it depends on how quickly judges set trials, but this won't go to trial until 2019.